Good morning, everybody, and Happy New Year. I'm Kim Sabo, President and CEO of the Arizona Lodging and Tourism Association, and I thank you all for joining us today for our annual Travel and Tourism Industry Legislative Kickoff Forum. We've got a very special program for you today where you're going to hear from two great panels. The first, a panel comprised of business, economic, and policy thought leaders, and the second is a panel comprised of extraordinary leaders from the Arizona State Legislature. I'll introduce the panel shortly, but first I'd like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Marriott International, the world's largest hotel corporation. Guided by family leadership since 1927, Marriott has remained true to its core principles of putting people first, improving communities, and opening doors to new opportunities. Thank you again to Marriott for making today's program possible. Well, these are certainly historic times that I don't think anybody could have planned for fiscally or psychologically, and the world has changed that I don't think any of us could have fathomed. Since the onset of COVID-19, which effectively grounded global tourism and crippled Arizona's economy, Arizona's local tourism industry has lost, the US economy has lost 3.5 direct travel jobs and $463 billion. In Arizona alone, we've lost tens of thousands of jobs, more than 40% of our workforce, and in the first 6 months of 2020 alone, we've lost $10 billion, with a B, billion dollars in direct visitor spending in the first 6 months alone. No other industry has been hit harder. It's not even close. This sector was hit first, it was hit worst, and it will certainly be one of the last to recover. And through all this, I don't think it's ever been more crystal clear that as goes travel, goes our economy. Here with us today on our first panel to discuss the critical role a strong travel and tourism industry plays in Arizona's economy and will continue to play into our recovery, we have President and CEO of the Arizona Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Glenn Hammer. Glenn leads an organization that has become the state's most powerful advocate for job creators. Glenn represents Arizona's business community on the national stage as well, where he serves as the chair of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Committee of 100 and serves on the U.S. Chamber's Board of Directors. In these positions, Glenn has elevated the voice of Arizona's business community to unprecedented levels. We also have one of Arizona's leading advocacy and policy minds, partner in business development and consulting firm, Malera Alvarez, Jaime Malera. Jaime is the former Arizona Superintendent of Public Instruction, two-term Arizona State Board of Education president, and was the leading advisor on policy and legislative affairs to Arizona Governor Jane D. Hull. And no pun intended, but rounding out our first panel is one of Arizona's leading policy-focused economists, president of Rounds Consulting, Jim Rounds. Mr. Rounds provides advice to policymakers throughout all levels of government and to private sector leaders in the community. He's delivered hundreds of economic presentations throughout Arizona and is quoted weekly on TV, radio, and in the print, frequently talking about today's topic, Arizona's travel and tourism industry. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us, and let's get right to it. We've got so much to discuss in a very short period of time. And Jim, I'd love to start with you. And again, thank you for your ardent support of this industry. And you've been very proactive on social media channels, as well as cited in the media, very frequently talking about the importance of this sector on Arizona's economy and the future of our fiscal well-being and vitality. Can you start us off today by setting the table and providing us with some perspective from an economist assessment? Just how important is the tourism industry to Arizona's economy?
It's a vital industry. It's one of the larger industries. It creates a lot of jobs. People tend to think of it as a little bit lower in terms of average wage, but it's also the stepping stone for people moving up the career ladder into other jobs as well. And so when you have these foundations to the economy that are this large, you go through a downturn like what we had, it could have a major impact on the state. And just to give it some context, the state lost about 300,000 jobs at the beginning of this recession. We recovered about 2/3 doing better than the US, but about half of those were in the tourism industry. And it's going to cost us maybe $1 billion in state and local tax collections if all we do is catch up at the current pace. What we need to do is try to grab some of those lost activity dollars, that pent up demand for travel. And one calculation we did was every 10% that we recapture is another $100 million in state tax collections. So it's worthwhile to invest a little bit here, because I think this is one of those times where the return on investment is going to be just massive.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. And Glenn, I'd like to go to you next. And you as well have been an outspoken advocate for this industry and for the thousands and thousands of small businesses that comprise it. I'd love to get your perspective on the economics of tourism and your assessment of how important it is that tourism recover.
Tim, I want to first thank you for being an extraordinary leader, because there's been no leader in our state that has done more to make sure that their industry was prepared as best possible when the pandemic hit. And your campaign to make sure that our outstanding lodging associations are safe is vitally important. And I know it's something that other industries have looked at to copy, as well as your continuous webinars in terms of very vital federal programs like the Paycheck Protection Program and things like that have been a lifesaver to, I know, so many of your small business members, which so many hotels are. And Kim, we're also very fortunate that you serve on our executive committee as the head of our tourism committee. So when you talk about policy items, the chamber is in 100% lockstep. And we're very fortunate that Arizona's youngest statesman and Jaime Malera also serves on our board. So I feel like we've got very good representation on the tourism side. So how big, when you look at it, you try to put this in context, and my favorite economist in the state, Jim Rounds, just did a great job of that. It's a $25 billion a year industry, and it was growing in 2019 before the pandemic hit. How big a deal is that? Well, here we'll give you some perspective. That $25 billion by itself, the tourism part of the Arizona economy, would put it in about the top 100 of world economies. The tourism part of the Arizona economy by itself is a top 100 world economy. So Kim, as you've said, as tourism goes, the economy goes, and I'm glad that the next panel will be our legislators, because I know you have some important things that they need to get done so that the industry can fully recover.
Excellent, Glenn. Thank you for highlighting some of those economics. I think we cannot emphasize those numbers enough. So thank you so much. And thank you to the Chamber for your constant partnership, support, and collaboration with this industry in carrying that message. Now I'm going to transition to Jaime. Jaime, goes without saying, gosh, you've been at the tip of the spear, advocating for this industry down at the legislature for many, many years, and advocating for so many legislative policies to better position this industry into the future. And we all know that we had some great policy right on the goal line in 2020 that you were instrumental in getting to that goal line. And as we all know, COVID-19 rolled in and derailed the session. So yesterday marked the start of the 55th Arizona legislature. And I'd love to get your thoughts on what we can expect, and what would you see the industry priorities being?
Well, thank you, Kim, and I'm very honored to be on this panel with these two distinguished gentlemen. First, I want to just talk a little bit about a statement that was made yesterday by Arizona's business community, which I think is a very, very critical. That sets the stage for us to deal with these kinds of issues that we're talking about. But you had Glenn Hammer, through Glenn's leadership, the Arizona Chamber, the Greater Phoenix Chamber of Commerce, Greater Phoenix Leadership, Southern Arizona Leadership Council, and the Greater Phoenix Economic Council basically said, look, legislators and policymakers in Arizona, cut out the silliness that's been going on, and cut out the things that are just creating a cancer in dealing with these types of issues. And that we are going to put our money where our mouths are and say, we're not going to support, we're not going to countenance individuals that lead disruption in our government. And that is a very important thing for us to, and I'm very proud to be associated with those organizations, because for them to stand up and say enough of this, we have serious issues that we have to deal with in Arizona. And at the top of the issue is, how do we get our tourism industry going again? We have some very solid ideas. There's a bill that was introduced yesterday by Senator Pace and Senator Bowie. They're taking the leadership on tourism marketing authorities that allow for our communities to start to get the resources they need to market themselves, and through a community effort that can really start to talk about why, as people start traveling again, why they need to come to Arizona. We're one of the best states in the union. Our ability to market ourselves, our ability to get folks going again is going to be vital. So there are things that we have teed up, you're right, Kim, that unfortunately this pandemic took away from us, and Jim and Glenn articulated very well why it's so critical for us to get back going again. But I think making sure our legislators understand that, let's put aside our differences and start working together on things like tourism that can really make a difference for Arizonans and Arizona's families.
Thank you, Jaime. I couldn't agree more. And I don't think there's ever been a point in history where leadership at every level, thought leaders, business, community, all leaders at every level, it's important to come together and exactly set a path forward collectively and in unity. So thank you for highlighting that, and also talking about the exciting Tourism Marketing Authority legislation that was indeed introduced yesterday. And after this panel, we will be talking to members of our legislature, one of which is Senator Bowie, who is the co-sponsor of that bill, as you had mentioned. Let's go back to you, Jim. Can we talk a little bit, let's go back to kind of the foundational economics and the timing of when COVID-19 hit our industry. Peak season, 2019, we saw record numbers. We really had no reason to believe that those record-breaking numbers wouldn't continue into 2020. And we know in mid-March, midst of spring training, spring break, it was a different story. Can you talk a little bit about the timing of that?
Yeah, the timing was bad. And it was much sharper than we anticipated it was going to be. Fortunately, we ended up doing our analysis and crunched our numbers after the fact, because I think we would have underpredicted the extent that things were going to fall. Now, it still recovered an okay percentage of the lost jobs, but it's still lagging the other industries within the state. A lot of it's going to depend on the distribution of the vaccine, getting people traveling again. But because of this particular downturn hit lower income individuals much more severely than middle and upper income individuals, we ended up not seeing as big of a crunch on our state tax collections. But we have to start investing some of these monies to get these dollars back. And I've talked to lawmakers for years about tax policy and economic development policy, credits and everything else. But our next step in our evolution, we made great improvements after the Great Recession, and we started growing at a rapid pace again. We dealt with regulatory reforms, we did tax policy reform. I even designed some of it. So I'm happy with everything that we did. But going forward, we have to focus on quality, and we have to start looking at return on investment. And unfortunately, the way that we do budgets is if something costs $100, you just take $100 off the revenues that you're going to be having when you decide if you could spend money on something else. However, when you have something that generates money, we have to start doing this dynamic analysis where you spend the $100, but in this case, you might get $1,000 back for each 100 that you spend. We have to, I don't want to say grow up, but we have to become more sophisticated in how we do these things, because if we start operating government like a business, which makes investments to make money the second year and the third year, and that's how businesses become strong and thrive. If we can start thinking in those terms, we'll do quite well. This will be one of our best economic expansions ever this decade, but we have to get over that hurdle of thinking in terms of return on investment, and tourism is a perfect example of that.
ROI, it's critical, it's undeniable, it's proven. So I don't think we can talk about that enough. I'm going to transition back to Glenn, and just talk about this industry holistically. You know, we're known around the world for our iconic resorts and our 1,200 hotels and the great outdoor destinations that we have to offer. But I think a misconception that I think is worth highlighting and repeating over and over and over again, while we are incredibly grateful to what I call the foundational infrastructure of our big brands, our Marriott's, our Best Westerns, which by the way is headquartered right here in Arizona, international headquarters, Choice, Hilton, etc. These are brands. And I think what is often lost is that this business is comprised of a vast majority of small business owners. These are people that have invested oftentimes their life savings in the purchase of an asset, which is the building, it's the hotel, and they franchise under a flag or under a brand name. So these are small business owners, again, impacting all 15 counties throughout our great state. And they're struggling month to month right now to figure out how to make that mortgage. How do we help them out? And how important is the notion or the realization that this industry is indeed small business?
Yeah, Kim, that's a great point. And Best Western is one of the great brands, and we're proud to have them headquartered here. Because I've stayed and seen Best Western hotels all over the country and all over the world. They are indeed small businesses. So, you know, to me, it's a few different things. One, continuing to make sure that the one entity, and that's the United States Congress and administration that has the big bazooka with dollars, can continue to make sure that the industry that's been hit the hardest has the resources it needs to rebound. That's part of it. But I also think there's a few other parts of the answer that are important. You know, through the leadership of Congressman Stanton, former Senator McSally, as well, full support of, I know your association, our association, MAG, Arizona-Mexico Commission. We're now going to, when the world does open up, our friends from Mexico are going to have the ability to not only visit Southern Arizona, and that policy was put in place by my first boss on the federal side, Congressman Colby. They're going to be able to visit and enjoy all the great things we have in this state. So they'll be able to go to the Grand Canyon, enjoy the Grand Canyon without the hassle that they used to. I also think we're going to have to work together. And Kim, you're also on the national stage. I know that the national folks hold you in very high regard and the work that you do. I think we're going to have to work together so we smartly, sensibly, and safely reopen our borders to an essential industry, tourism. So that's on the south, our friends from Mexico, on the north, our friends from Canada. I don't think it's a good idea just to keep kicking the can down the road and say we're going to keep our borders closed for safe tourism. And my final point on this is the importance of getting vaccinated. It is wrong to say a vaccine is a silver bullet because we have more than one vaccine now. So there's silver bullets that have 95% efficacy. That's a huge deal. And we saw Governor Brewer today get vaccinated. So the program that Governor Ducey has put out with through the leadership of Dr. Kara Chris, that right now, as we speak, is operating 24/7 in State Farm Stadium and is going to expand out. I can't emphasize enough how important that is, because for these revenues to really be restored, particularly for the small business hotels, we're going to need to have a safer environment. And the vaccines, in addition to the mitigation measures, wearing a mask and all that type of activity that's very important, is the way out of this mess, in my opinion.
Agree entirely. And I think you touched on a critically important topic, and that is reestablishing consumer confidence. And I want to applaud this industry holistically for leading with solutions. We at AZLTA joined with our national partner and modeled our AZ Safe and Clean initiative after the Safe Stay initiative, which is, again, a model program where all the national brands came together in collaboration with the CDC to come up with best practices, guidance, and protocols to implement holistically throughout all of our properties, again, to reestablish that consumer confidence. in reestablishing that consumer confidence, we also talk about promoting tourism, and it's sort of a balance. We want to make sure that it's safe to travel again once we promote. But Jaime, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about the importance of investing in tourism promotion and striking that balance with ensuring that it's safe to do so and reestablishing consumer confidence.
Well, when we invest in tourism promotion, it really is investing in Arizonans, right? I mean, as Jim mentioned, the economic impacts of tourism in the state are massive. So when the legislators start to take up the budget, and I know they're going to have a panel discussion after us, that really needs to be high on their list of priorities. I really think that one of the key areas that if we start to look at getting Arizona back on its feet, and as Glenn mentioned, people need to get the vaccination. We need to promote that. We need to make sure that that's utilized. But then we need to look at those kinds of structures like tourism marketing authorities that will allow us to start to say, as you're starting to travel again, Arizona is the place to come to. And then along with that, as we look at targeted investments, we also need to look at things that can digress from our ability to move forward. And those things are, Governor Ducey mentioned yesterday, liability reform. We cannot have these frivolous lawsuits that will take away from our ability to function normally as businesses. We saw what happened this last fall. It was absolutely amazing, where there was a serious proposal that in the city of Phoenix, they were looking at regulations that would have created havoc for our tourism industry. They would have set in place these onerous regulations and costs that really would have bankrupted a lot of our small business owners that run these franchises like Best Westerns. It was absolutely ludicrous. But see, those are the kinds of things that I talk about. Serious policies need to be dealt with to get our tourism industry back on its footing. We need to make sure that we go against those kinds of things, like frivolous lawsuits, and we need to start targeting our budgets that start promoting Arizona again, that really could kickstart us and get us back to where we were. Arizona, as Jim has pointed out, he's done some great work in economic analysis. We are a state that we are primed to really start to take off again. Now, we've done some things that are unfortunately bad. Prop 208 was one of them, as we know. But I think as we start to look at things that can mitigate that, get our tax structure in a place where Arizona is seen as one of the economic engines in the union, and then also promote our tourism industry that can really start to elevate us. That could be a really strong thing that our policymakers can accomplish this session.
Absolutely. Well, I know we are about 5 minutes out here, so I would like to officially start the last one or two questions, sort of a speed-ish round, but just give you a heads up on the 5-minute warning. I would love to talk about, and Jaime, thank you for talking about the liability, going to be critically important to this industry, the liability protections. And Glenn, thank you and your national partners for leading the charge on this. We saw this happen years ago. It sort of developed into a cottage industry of these frivolous lawsuits that really plagued this industry. And our businesses, small businesses, again, found themselves better off settling out of court, but it was like a cash register for these bad actors. We want to do everything we can to protect this industry that is indeed going above and beyond in demonstrating every effort to elevate what is already a gold standard of health, safety, and cleanliness protocols and taking it to the next level. I'd like to, again, transition back to Jim and really sort of get your last few thoughts on the importance of this legislative session and positioning not only this industry, but our state holistically for recovery and positioning us so that we're able to capture the lion's share of visitors.
So a lot of things make the economy tick, and tourism is one of those items. But in order for us to have a really good rest of the decade, we need to have a broader package and doing things right across the board. So we need to combine the tourism efforts with some other good policy, like Jaime was mentioning, to really move forward. But even within the tourism industry, we need additional coordination. And for example, the rural parts of the state were hit much more severely than the urban parts, even though it's been severe everywhere. But even if we ramped up some spending in tourism, we need additional economic development efforts and for them to get their houses in order in some cases and continue to advance in others in order to really maximize the opportunity. So there, kind of like the silver bullet comment that Glenn made, there's multiple opportunities, but it's not just one or two bullets. We need to have several. So we need to coordinate and we need to keep talking about tourism in the broader context of the state's recovery, talk about the recovery in the context of what's the point of us recovering and doing well, so we make more tax revenue that we can then reinvest. So it's all hands on deck, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jim. Glenn, I'm going to shift to you and ask the same question.
The state legislative focus on jobs really needs to put a special emphasis on tourism, because as Jim said, we've recovered over 2/3 of our jobs, but the vast majority of the jobs that have not been recovered are in the hospitality industry, including all of the businesses that you represent. So we need to focus on this industry. And I agree with Jim and Jaime that the ROI on investment is off the charts. And I also just think on the international side, great opportunities as the borders start opening up. And I think that by the time we get to the summer, even though it's hot, we like to say it's a dry heat. For a lot of Americans in particular looking to travel and like me have ants in their pants, they're going to want to come here and we'll be ready. So I really think the industry is going to recover. We have a great session. It'll expedite and make that recovery more sustainable. And Kim, again, just thank you for your extraordinary leadership during the most difficult period in this industry's history ever.
Thank you for those kind words, but we all know this is a team effort. This is Team Arizona. We're all working in lockstep for the best interest of our state. And I couldn't be more honored to be working so closely with you, Glenn, and the Chamber. So thank you for all you do, and I know we'll continue to do. Jaime, you're the perfect transitional person to kind of answer this question, but then take us into our next panel, where we are going to welcome 4 incredible legislative leaders who have been champions of this industry and champions of small business. If you could close this first panel by talking about priorities again.
Well, I think this legislative session, there needs to be a little bit of caution. I mean, it's been talked about that, as we're going through this fiscal year, they do need to be very targeted on how they invest. And I think tourism is one of those areas that should be at the forefront of the kinds of things that we can invest in that can be very helpful. And as we start to enact these types of policies like tourism marketing authorities, President Fan helped us last year negotiate how we have a reasonable rental car and peer-to-peer legislation that could be fair for the entire industry. Those are the kinds of things I think we can do now that will set the stage for what we can do in subsequent years. And if we enact reasonable liability, when you have businesses like the tourism industry that has put forward, here's what we're going to do and how we're going to hold ourselves accountable to make sure people are safe, make sure that there's going to be a way to contain these pandemics. And if they do that, then they shouldn't be, again, hit with all these frivolous lawsuits that really can ruin businesses. So as we start to do that, as we start to set the stage for targeted investments, reasonable statewide policies, then I think it really puts Arizona in a very good position to get back again and be the state that we were, which was one of the economic engines in the country.
Clearly, so many important topics to discuss, so little time. We're going to have many more webinars to come. I hope you all return for a future webinar. Thank you for carrying the water of this great industry and of our great state. And again, can't thank you enough for joining us. I look forward to working in lockstep with each of you as we help be great partners in our recovery. Thank you all again for joining us. And now we're going to transition to our legislative panel.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
bear with us just one moment as we shift from one panel to the next and bring in our esteemed Arizona State legislators. So yesterday marked the start of the 55th legislature, starting an important year for our state's economic recovery. And today we're honored to have 4 esteemed legislative leaders joining us to provide an overview of what we should expect this year at the state capitol. This panel represents communities throughout Arizona, from Prescott to Kingman to Tucson to right here in the Valley. And this is a panel of bipartisan leaders, each a champion of the travel and tourism industry, and each possessing a keen understanding of its impact on our state's economy. These will be critically important leaders to our state's recovery and in coming together and setting a path forward. And now I'd like to introduce our legislative leadership panel, starting with Senate President Karen Fann. Karen Fann is only the 2nd female Senate president in the history of Arizona. She was first elected in November of 2016 to represent Legislative District 1, which covers 8,000 square miles throughout Yavapai County and portions of Maricopa County. And previously, she served this district from 2011 to 2016 as a state representative. She's a successful small business owner and advocate, and again, an ardent supporter of Arizona's travel and tourism industry. Also joining us today is Senator Sean Bowie. Since being elected to the Senate in 2016, Senator Bowie has been a champion for K-12 education, mental health issues, and supporting small businesses. He's been a vocal advocate for this industry and co-sponsored our industry's top legislative priority during the 2020 legislative session, tourism marketing authorities. And just yesterday, that legislation was reintroduced, and once again, Senator Bowie is co-sponsoring that bill, which is SB 1101, Tourism Marketing Authorities. Next, please welcome Representative Dr. Regina Cobbs. Representative Cobb has been a resident of Kingman for 21 years after graduating with a DDS degree from Case Western Reserve University in 1993. She currently owns 2 dental practices in Kingman. Having served as president of the Kingman Chamber of Commerce and running her own small business, she understands the daily struggles of government regulation and the importance of supporting and positioning our small businesses for success. Excuse me. And rounding out today's legislative panel, we welcome Representative Daniel Hernandez Jr. As a first-generation college student, Daniel served as a congressional intern for former Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords. Many of us remember the swift and heroic actions Daniel took when a gunman opened fire at a public event in Tucson years ago, shooting the Congresswoman and 18 other people. Daniel is widely credited for this heroic act and in saving the Congresswoman's life. Driven by his passion for social justice and public service, he's worked on many issues at the state, local, and federal levels, including gun violence prevention, LGBT equality, comprehensive immigration reform, and education equity, and is, of course, another solid champion of the Arizona travel and tourism industry. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for joining us today. As I mentioned earlier, we hosted a panel with business, economic, and policy thought leaders who sort of set the table on the economic situation that this industry is facing, but clearly the state, our nation, and the world is facing. And again, never before have we seen times like this, and we've never before relied on leaders such as you like we do now. Your role in charting our path forward is going to be vital. And I'd like to ask each of you, go around the screen, what do you see as the state's top priorities going into the 55th legislative session? President Fann, I'll go ahead and start with you. And you're muted.
I thought maybe you were going to control it from your end. Thank you so much.
That.
We are, which is always a really good idea, you know. So thank you so much for inviting us. Obviously, in my opinion, the top #1 issue is COVID-19, because everything we do, whether it's education, tourism, our economy, everything seems to be revolving around COVID-19. So I believe getting those vaccinations out, I believe trying to get us back to as normal as possible, as quickly as possible, is probably the number one issue that we need to do. The second would be that liability bill. We really need to work with our constituents and as well as our colleagues to make sure that we can get a good bill done that will help protect the businesses from frivolous lawsuits.
Thank you. Agree entirely. The liability protections will indeed be critical. I'd like to ask the same question. We'll go to Senator Bowie.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you so much for having me and for your leadership on these really important issues. As President Fan said, COVID is obviously at the top of our list, ensuring that our cities, our schools, our small businesses, have the PPE, the equipment that they need, getting the vaccine rolled out. You may have heard State Farm Stadium has now turned into a giant vaccination site. So we're hoping to get that rolled out to other areas of the state as well. And just making sure that we are gradually reopening our economy and getting this pandemic under control so we can reopen again as quickly as possible. And, Arizona has great weather right now. Not a lot of people are able to experience it. But my hope is over the spring and the summer, as we get through this pandemic, folks will be able to visit us and our tourism industry will be able to grow. And just putting our state in a better position to do that, I think, is going to be our most important priority this legislative session.
Thank you. And Representative Cobb, I'll go to you next and ask the same question. Priorities for this session.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you for having us all here today. I appreciate the question, and of course, my focus is going to be a lot on money because I'm the appropriations chair. But one of the first things I think we need to do is getting a liability reform and protections in place for the tourism industry and for all. When we talk about our schools or our states or cities, all of us need that liability protection. And I think that that's going to be our number one piece of legislation coming forward. Regulation, discouraging bad policies this year would be something that we need to have a focus on. Reinvesting in marketing, we've all touched on that. And I agree that we need to do that. And I love that someone brought in, I can't remember which one of the panelists brought in the rural areas. We're talking about dude ranches and wineries and some of the things that we are kind of like our second tier of marketing. And we really need to focus on that this year. And of course, tax structuring is something that I think that I'll be focusing on this year. And broadband, that's something that no one has brought into the picture. And I think we really need to do some regulations on broadband and some investments on broadband.
Excellent. And I do want to get back to the idea of Arizona tourism as the lifeblood of the entirety of our state, positive economic impact in all 15 counties. But first, I'm going to go to Representative Hernandez. Love to hear about your priorities for session.
So I represent Southern Arizona, and right now what we're seeing is some of the largest events that are some of the biggest economic drivers for Southern Arizona. The rodeo, which is one of the biggest events that we have in all of Tucson. Most school districts take a rodeo break because it's so important to our economy. We have the GEM show, which has been canceled. So we're seeing already that in the first quarter of the year, we've already had some of our biggest events that really are big economic drivers already get completely canceled. That's going to have such a negative impact on the Southern Arizona economy. So while I agree that we need to look at liability, I think we really need to be careful and really make sure that we're talking to stakeholders, because what happened last session was that some folks were working on a piece of legislation but weren't actually making sure that we were talking to all stakeholders, and we didn't get enough vetting of the bill. Because I think we need to make sure that we protect businesses, but that we balance it so that we make sure that we're not rewarding people who are doing insufficient work. But what we're seeing in the tourism industry, I think, is people going above and beyond constantly with the absence of requirements to make sure that they're taking care of their customers and their consumers. Because I think when I talk to people in the industry, you all realize that if you get a position where your staff is getting sick or your customers are getting sick, it's not good for business. But making sure that any liability bill that we work on really is making sure that there are guidelines to make sure that we're protecting staff and customers. COVID obviously is at the top of everybody's list. Really figuring out what we need to do to roll out the vaccine more judiciously and quickly, I think, is critical. We just saw the launch of the new site this week that's going to be open 24 hours a day, and that's great. But in Santa Cruz County, which has 15 wineries in my district, we got 200 vaccinations last week. We're getting 200 this week, and we only have one site for the 50,000 people that live in Santa Cruz County to get vaccinated. So there is great things happening in Maricopa County, but those of us who represent areas outside of Maricopa County really need to have additional support going, because there is so many lodging and tourism opportunities across the state, not just in Maricopa County, that we really need to make sure that we're doing more to support. And the last thing I'll mention really quickly is I really want to see a package where we can shore up our businesses, because while we are trying to weather this storm right now, we are going to need to provide additional support. And there's been some federal dollars that have come in, but we at the state and local level really need to make sure that we're helping shore up the businesses so that they can remain open until we can weather this storm. Because just expecting you to just, keep chugging along, you were in free fall for a long time last year because of COVID. So we need to make sure that we shore you up now so that you're open, so that next year when we have the gem show again, when we have the rodeo parade, or when we have spring training, you're still around to take care of those customers and those folks coming to Arizona.
Thank you. So appreciate that wisdom and that support. And that goes back to part of what we discussed on the first panel, the business panel, and that is the idea that this industry is indeed comprised of majority small businesses. While we're blessed to have these iconic resorts in Arizona, the majority of our industry is made up of very small businesses, oftentimes individuals investing in their life savings in an asset, the purchase of a building under a flag, which is a brand, the Marriotts, the Best Westerns, the big boys that really stabilize, and they're the foundation of the industry. But we've got small business owners, all of which you are wonderful supporters of, that invest in these ventures. And again, going back to Representative Cobb and what you said about the importance of this industry on our rural communities, this industry is indeed the lifeblood of all of our rural communities. And what are your thoughts on how we get support to them in the short term to shore them up? Many of them are struggling month to month just to make their mortgage. And love to, again, go around. I'll start with President Fan. How do we shore them up in the short term so that the marketing that we're going to be doing, we have businesses to market in the future?
Agreed. And that's one of the reasons why we started doing our stakeholder meetings here in the Senate, addressing and speaking with a lot of our tourism industry, as well as restaurants, bars, everybody else, because they were really the worst hit and still are being the worst hit. We have pushed so hard to make sure that we get some extra PPE money right in there for them, that we can keep those unemployment benefits coming for their employees, so that so we know that they will know that they have a job to come back to. Again, we go back to COVID. If we can just get on top of this, our hotels will open back up, the conventions will start flourishing again, and we can start rocking and rolling. But we're not going to be able to do that unless we get a handle on all of this. I do believe that we need to keep working with the restaurants and the hotels to make sure that they are viable. We need to assist them in the second round of PPE loans if needed, to make sure that they have those additional revenues as well. And then, you know what? Twitter seems to be pretty hot these days. Maybe we ought to just keep tweeting about our favorite restaurant or hotel and help them with some free advertising. That always seems to help too.
Fantastic. Senator Bowie, I'm going to go to you next with the same question.
Well, yeah, like President Fan said, getting this pandemic under control, Arizona, we've got the worst COVID rate in the country right now in terms of cases per capita. It's been that way for about a week or two now. So getting this under control is really important. I think a lot of folks want to go out there. They want to go, visit restaurants. They want to do maybe a staycation at one of our resorts, but they still are a little uneasy because of what they see on the news and all the cases that are that are out there. So getting this pandemic under control is really critically important. I think at the federal level, I think we'll see some additional relief from the Biden administration coming in when Congress reconvenes. Those PPP loans were just increased in the legislation that passed a couple of weeks ago. So that's going to be really important to support our small businesses. And then our social safety net, the president mentioned unemployment benefits. I'm going to be introducing a bill next week that deals with something called the income disregard, which basically means that folks can, if they can only find part-time work at a small business, they can do that and then also still be eligible for unemployment benefits. So those are dollars that are going to be going into the economy. I've seen a lot of data on personal savings has really gone up in the last year. So I think folks are really itching to travel, really itching to visit our small businesses. They just want a little more peace of mind and a little more certainty of this pandemic is getting under control. So it's really important that everyone get the vaccination once they're eligible. And in the next couple of months, we're able to come out of this and be stronger here in the spring and summer of this year.
Great. And Representative Cobb, I'll go to you next with the same. Oh, you're muted.
Okay, thank you. I just agree. I agree with Senator Fan and President Fan and Senator Bowie on a lot of the issues that they just talked about. Making sure that we assist our businesses with the PPP loans and the programs that are being introduced from the federal legislation are sometimes difficult to get through, and navigating through those is something that we need to help at the state level. But we also need to, when those CARE dollars come in, is to get them to our businesses as quickly as we possibly can. And then also the consumer confidence that you talked about, Kim, getting vaccination. Once you get vaccinated, the 70% of the population, you pretty much eradicate whatever pandemic, whatever disease is going on. So we've got to start working on getting that consumer confidence in the vaccination to begin with. And then once they're all vaccinated, then bringing in the tourism people back in.
Thank you. And Representative Hernandez.
Clearly, the best way to shore up and advertise our tourism industry in Arizona is to get our COVID vaccination rate up and our COVID infection rate down. I think what we're seeing right now, especially that we just hit a really grim mile marker, which was 10,000 deaths in the state of Arizona, we are not doing enough to mitigate the spread of COVID in the state of Arizona. And while we know that there are vaccines that are effective and that they're working, we're not getting them out quickly enough. Part of that is a supply chain problem at the federal level, but part of that is we have a ton of vaccines that were sitting in refrigerators and in freezers here in Arizona and weren't getting out quickly enough. So we need to make sure that we're really putting pressure on the governor to shore up the vaccination and make sure that it's happening not just in Maricopa and Pima County, but statewide. And then I think the other thing that we really need to look at is how do we work with you all in the industry to figure out what are some of the best practices? Because you all have been doing this during a really difficult time, and we need to learn from what you've already done. So while we're coming up with any new regulations or laws to govern how you have to operate, we should be looking to what you've already been doing, because you've been doing through trial and error a lot of innovative ways to try and keep your customers and your employees safe. So I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned there. And I think the last thing that I would say is when we're looking at the next year, if we don't do the work now to shore up these businesses and support your members, especially many of them that are small businesses, we're going to keep seeing restaurants, we're going to keep seeing other ancillary businesses that feed off of that tourism, off of those hotel stays, closing down. So we really have, I think, an opportunity to support what is a multiplier in our economy in Arizona, because people that come and stay in hotels, go to restaurants, go to gift shops, go to concerts. What I'm also really worried about is we have a lot of decline in our music and arts. So because they've had to close up entirely for almost a year, when those try and start back up, if we're not doing enough to support them, they're not going to be able to reopen and bring in those dollars of people going to restaurants and staying in hotels to be able to see shows, concerts, and other things like that.
You make some great points that I'm going to get back to momentarily, but I do want to thank President Fan. I know you have a hard stop right now, carved out time in your incredibly busy calendar. I know you've got to be somewhere, but want to thank you so much for joining us today. And any closing thoughts you'd like to share?
No, other than this is going to be a challenging session for us, partly because of politics, partly because of COVID. And I am just absolutely asking and praying that all of us, let's try and work together as a team. It doesn't matter whether you're an R, a D, or anywhere in between. This is Arizona. This is our state. These are our businesses and our families and our friends. So let's put aside all of these petty differences and let's roll up our sleeves and bring this state back to stronger than ever. And I think we can do it if we all just work together as a team.
Team AZ, couldn't agree more. Thank you so much. Thank
I
you. for
like
joining
that.
us. Team AZ. You heard it
Hashtag
right here.
You heard it here first.
Right. Thank you. And please, Senator Bowie, Representative Hernandez, and Cobb, you're going to hopefully stay for the next few minutes. But again, I wanted to get the president out at her hard stop. I'd like to go back to what Representative Hernandez was touching on, and that is indeed policy as it relates to kind of health, cleanliness, safety standards. I think over the summer, we as an industry were sort of blindsided by some potential policy that was going to impact an industry already reeling and decimated by COVID. And I do always like to take the opportunity to brag about what this industry does on a leadership perspective in coming up with solutions. The AZLTA partnered with our national association, the American Hotel and Lodging Association, and modeled an initiative after Safe Stay called AZ Safe and Clean. And this is an effort to rebuild consumer confidence and demonstrate not only to the general public, but to policy thought leaders, community business leaders, what this industry already does to, these are foundational within our industry: health, cleanliness, safety standards, not only for our visitors, but for our employees, which are the heart of our businesses. And Representative Hernandez, you touched on this. Fortunately, at the Phoenix City Council level, there was a pause button hit because there was quite a bit of stakeholder contributions that came in to hopefully shed a light on what this industry is already doing. So I want to get back to that and talk about the importance of stakeholder input on policy formulation. We want to be great partners and just appreciate that we could be at the table to discuss and educate maybe on some things that we are already doing in this regard. So why don't I go back to Representative Hernandez, since you broached this topic, and hear from you.
I think when I've been talking to folks in the industry, I have a lot of experience with the folks down in Southern Arizona, particularly those that are involved in the wineries. And I've just been completely astonished at some of the steps that folks have taken to try and keep their customers and their employees safe, from the way that they handle masking to entire businesses shifting their model to create things like hand sanitizer. I'm sitting here with a box of hand sanitizer that I got from one of my wineries and distilleries. But I think when we are looking at public health and public safety measures, I think we didn't see enough balance last year when we were really looking at what was coming down the pipeline. So the governor would say these businesses could open, but these couldn't. And I think it created a real disparity because we were saying you can go golfing, but all pools and gyms have to be closed for this period. So I think if we're going to be doing anything, that we're really including input and stakeholder insight into what you're already doing, because without understanding what you're doing, it's really difficult for us to understand how we can work and partner with the industry to take on what you're already doing and maybe shore up a couple of folks that aren't quite at that level. But I think what was really damaging, and what I'm hoping that we'll be able to avoid as we try and rush to address COVID this year, is that we don't just do things without talking to all facets of the industry, and that we're really looking at a fair system so that you're not having to close up your pool, which is a really big money driver for a lot of our hotels in the middle of summer, where a lot of Arizonans don't have pools, but you can't go to this hotel or that hotel because their pools are closed for the next month, their amenities are closed. And for so many of our facilities that we have here in Arizona, if your amenities are closed, you do not operate a hotel anymore. It's almost impossible to get people to come and stay if you don't have even the most basic of amenities. So when we're doing regulations, that we're being tough but fair to everybody, so that we're holding up that public health standard, but we're not making it crippling for you to be able to still operate your industry.
Thank you. That is music to the ears, I guarantee you, of all of our participants today. And this is a very proud plug for AZ Safe and Clean, which is the initiative that AZLTA created in partnership again with our national association and all the national brands in collaboration with the CDC. Our effort to really demonstrate the leadership this industry is taking on elevating health, safety, cleanliness standards to a level already the gold standard, if you will. I'd love to go to you on this exact same topic, Senator Bowie, and get your thoughts.
Yeah, it's a great campaign, and thank you to you and your colleagues for leading it. But I think this talk about a stakeholder process and how this process should work. I know we talked earlier about the liability bill, which I know is a very important priority for a lot of our small businesses in the state, for the tourism industry. When we talk about this issue, there's a lot of talk about, you know, how is it going to impact the employers and those who own these businesses. We also need to talk about how it's going to impact the employees. You know, we have tens of thousands of employees who work in this industry, our hospitality workers. You know, they might feel uncomfortable sometimes when they're at work, and they want to make sure that they're safe as well, as long as the patrons and those that own the businesses. So when we're crafting this legislation and we're talking about it, it's not just enough to think about, you know, who's going to be staying at the hotel, who owns the hotel, but also who works at the hotel, so that everyone feels safe. And I think once we get to that place and we work on that language and make sure that everyone is included, I think we'll be in a better place. So the safety of our employees, again, tens of thousands of them around the state, I think it's really important that we keep that in mind as we work on bills like the liability protections.
Critically important, pointing out the health and safety of visitors, but also what I call the heart of our industry, the heart of the house, our workforce. So thank you for that. I agree entirely. And Representative Cobb, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, there's a couple of things. One of the things is AZ Safe and Clean is such a good program. And what we got to try to do is when you do a program like this is try to utilize it across other industries too. And I think that you can just take what is good from one, what we've done right in some of our industries, and reimplant them into other industries. And I think that that's something that we need to look at doing all across the board. These have worked for us. One of the things that I do as a dentist is I said, we already had CDC protocols in place. We already had cross-contamination, all those things in place. Utilize what we've already done, what we've already had in place, and move that across the board with all of the industries. And I think you guys have done that with AZ Safe and Clean. And then I was very encouraged, I think, by the governor's speech yesterday, and reinvesting in Arizona, and still utilizing the CDC protocols, talking about the vaccinations. I think that the only way we're going to get out there is again by marketing that we are AZ Safe and Clean, that we are doing protocols that are safe, and that we are working with the vaccinations and getting those things in place before we get back into our really high tourism section, which is coming in the next month or two. One of the things that we haven't talked about today is sports venues, and we talked about the arts and all of those, but we've also lost the music, the sports venues. We've lost those things. We've got to start creating practices in all of those areas to where the tourism that's coming in feels safe.
Excellent point, and that is the element of group travel, events, conventions, huge portion of this industry. And as was the case with our first panel, there's so many things to talk about, this being an important topic. We're going to have future webinars, and certainly would love to have you join us again. If we could just take a minute to do sort of a speed round. I know that you're all incredibly busy, first week of session, and just so appreciate you joining us. But if we could close out, again, speed round, get your final thoughts, and also input recommendations for the industry. how can we partner and help you? How can we support you in carrying the water of the importance of this industry? Representative Hernandez, I'll kick that to you.
Quick, what can you guys do? Invite us to tour your properties in our districts. I think that's such an important thing to really see what the AZ Clean and Safe initiative is doing in our industries. We need to see what you're doing in person, and I think reaching out, inviting us so we can go down and visit would be a really great way for us to learn what struggles your folks have in our districts. I think there's a really great opportunity this year for some real bipartisanship. To Senator Bowie's point, I think when we're talking about liability, you have a broad consensus that we don't want people to be stuck in these frivolous lawsuits, but we need to make sure that we're bringing all stakeholders in to have those conversations, because that was one of the things that didn't happen in the House last year. I know it was starting in the Senate before COVID happened. So hopefully this time we will really be able to bring everybody together to make sure that when this bill comes out, it's not passed by just one party, but that we have a bipartisan bill that talks to all stakeholders.
Great recommendation. We call those heart of the house tours. We're going to get those rescheduled for sure. It has been challenging, obviously, in these times of COVID, but we're going to get back to that. And I think that's a great point. No better way than to demonstrate and show you what we are doing. Thank you for that, Representative. Senator Bowie, I'll go to you.
I'll echo what Representative Hernandez said, getting to tour your properties and seeing all the great work that you're doing in our communities and throughout the state, or if you're in Representative Cobb's district, I always love to go to Northern Arizona and check out those properties as well. As Kim mentioned earlier, I dropped a bill yesterday that I'm co-sponsoring, Senate Bill 1101, that has to do with tourism marketing authorities. That's a really important bill to support our cities and towns and helping grow their tourism sectors. So make sure you sign in on that bill. Make sure you contact your legislators and tell them that they should vote yes. It's a Senate bill on that really important bill. So those are a couple of things you can do to support our work here at the Capitol.
Again, thank you for your continued support and leadership in co-sponsoring what is indeed a sort of an industry self-help bill. So appreciate that very, very much. Thank you, Senator. And to Representative Cobb, to wrap us up today, love to have you take it home by sharing your thoughts.
I just think we have to go back to what we talked about originally about unity and put all our partisans behind us and try to do everything bipartisan. I was honored to be able to be on the panel today with 3 of my very good friends, actually. And so we do bipartisanship social events behind the scenes to make sure that when we come forward, we're actually working together at the legislature also. So I was with Daniel and Sean and President Fan, we all seem to get along well, and we just need to carry that forward into our sessions and to the good work that we're doing at the Capitol.
Absolutely. Again, extraordinary leaders. This has been a great panel. Again, each an advocate for the industry, for small business, and an advocate for Team AZ, as you heard it right here. Thank you all again. We look forward to being great partners, collaborative partners moving forward, again, in unity, and consider yourselves all invited to a Heart of the House tour. We will get those set up, and Representative Hernandez, thank you for pointing that out. We need to get back to those. Again, best of luck for this session. Thank you for carving out time at a very busy time in the year and in history. Appreciate it so much. And finally, again, thank you to Marriott International for making today's event possible. We look forward to having you on a future event. And again, have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you all very much for joining us.
Thank you.